Do dogs pick up on your emotions? It's a constant question that we are asked when it comes certainly to reactive behaviour. Well, join me in today's podcast and Lifting All Ships to find out the answer to that very question. Hi there, I'm Kamal Fernandez, world-renowned dog trainer and dog professional and creator of the podcast Lifting All Ships. So today's conversation is talking about the emotional Wi-Fi that our dogs connect to when it comes to the relationship that we have. So recently on social media, I was scrolling through Facebook as you do, and I came across a quite somewhat provocative post where it said that dogs don't necessarily pick up on our emotions, and there was a huge discussion about whether this was relevant. And I don't know whether the person created it to be provocative, but essentially what they were saying is that for those people that have dogs with behavioural challenge, that they've been told that they have contributed or caused it, that they should free themselves from the blame of their dog's behaviour, and that it isn't their fault. And it got me thinking, and I think I understood the intention behind the post, which was to alleviate victim shaming people that have dogs with behavioural problems. But it did get me thinking, and it's something that I've said for a long time, that dogs are hardwired to connect with our emotional Wi-Fi. If we think about the purpose and the origins of dogs, they were first created, and we had that deep connection because of their inbuilt desire to be social. They're social beings, they're social creatures, and we are social beings, and we formed that affinity and that connection, when we were wandering the earth butt naked, and dogs were wolves, and they didn't come in quite the array of characters, sizes and shapes that we have now. But definitely the big thing that we had was a connection with their ability to read body language, to pick up on what we were thinking and feeling, and almost, for want of a better term, a subliminal connection with them, and almost that psychic connection with our dogs, where they could almost they could almost read our minds. And that really has stood us in good stead for a long time. Anybody that's owned a dog for any length of time will probably have experienced that connection, or I certainly hope that you have, with a dog where they are so connected to us, they can almost anticipate our thoughts, our feelings. And that largely is through a training, consciously or subconsciously, where we've taught the dogs, that when we pick up our keys, that when we put our shoes on, that means we're going for a dog walk, or, that don't lie in that particular place in the house because it means there's a door going to be opened, and so as I approach that door, the dog automatically moves, so we think, the dog knows I'm going to the bathroom, but actually the dog's probably picked up that picture. But there is something deeper at play when we talk about dogs and the connection that they make with us, and that is tuning into our emotions. Dogs are brilliant at connecting with us on far deeper a level than just picking up where they receive reinforcement and the fact that I'm the provider of their latest meal. For me, the beauty and joy of owning a dog is forming that really intense relationship where they almost can read my mind and certainly my emotions. So to give you some anecdotal information, or a story, some years ago now, I was involved with a production called Dogs Might Fly, and it was this outrageous idea to teach dogs to fly a plane. And it was put together by a production company called Oxford Scientific. You can have a look at the program. I think it's online. I might even be able to find the link and share it in the show notes. But the premise of the show is that we took 12 rescue dogs, and we, over a period of, it was probably about a year of working with them, 6 months of training pre the actual flying the plane stage, And then we eventually got the dogs to fly a plane, and 3 of the dogs actually did do that task, and it was, as I said, it was shown on the program called Dogs Might Fly on Sky Television. But one of the many things that they did with the dogs was test various aspects of, and they had Professor Adam. I'm not going to butcher his surname, but he was a professor that looked at cognitive abilities of dogs and how they can pick up on our emotions and that connection that we have with them. And what he did is he devised tests along the way to examine and explore the connection that we have with dogs. And one specific test that he created and evaluated was each dog was taken in a space. It happened to be the foyer of a house that one of the rooms, that we were working in this particular house. And in that room would be an actress, and the actress would start a conversation with us. The dog would be with us, and they'd be allowed to do whatever. There was no prerequisite that the dog had to sit down or stay. It was just the dog being in the environment. And then the actress would start to spontaneously cry and appear incredibly upset. And what we were looking for was, could the dog pick up on the change of emotion in a complete stranger? And we took all the dogs through that process, and definitely a spectrum of responses. But one dog in particular, or the 2 dogs in particular that really, really jumped out to me was, one was called Reggie, and he was a dog that ultimately went to fly the plane. He was a German Shepherd cross Labrador. Beautiful dog, gold, like a Labrador colour, but looked very much like a German Shepherd with floppy ears. Phenomenal dog, and his reaction was so beautiful to that person. He was there nonchalantly, hanging out. He had a bomb-proof temperament. As soon as she started to cry and get emotional, he went over to her, he appeased her, he licked at her face, he nuzzled her hands, and he didn't know this person at all, and he really tried to, and purely anthropomorphizing it, to soothe and to comfort her. The other contrast was a Malinois that I had to train, which was called Tess. And Tess really had an adverse reaction to that person's emotions. And that she was in the environment totally fine, very social little dog, happy-go-lucky. A more moderate Malinois, not too extreme in her behaviour, but she was sitting there nicely, focused on me, largely really chilled. I can remember distinctly just casually looking around, and as the person started to cry, she had a massive outburst. And what the scenario was, we would be having a conversation with the person, and then they would pause, and then they would begin to cry. And obviously, that's a real trained skill. And at that moment when there was that silence, you could see the dog's behaviour start to change. And once she started crying, she really, really got, and you would deem her behaviour as reactive. She would bark and she'd lunge and she'd back away, and we obviously remedied that. We moved the dog away, gave her a couple of minutes, brought her back in. The woman said hello to her, gave some treats, and the dog was absolutely fine. And it really, really, really articulated how dogs absolutely will pick up on our emotions. Now, we don't know the history of those dogs, either dogs. We don't know if something has happened to them where they've seen somebody crying and they've, been reinforced for comforting them, quite possibly, or the person's cried and, shown a level of apprehension. That could have been Tessa's experience. We don't know. But the thing that we can definitely say is both those dogs had a very distinct response. And they had a very clear and profound reaction in that moment. And what really stood out for me was the difference in their reaction based on who the dogs were. So Reggie was a bomb-proof dog. He was a dog that whenever we put him through any assessments on temperament or environmental changes, he was absolutely rock solid. His temperament was bomb-proof. One experience that we put them in, because the dogs had to go up in a plane, was to put the dogs in a cherry picker, which is, for those that you don't understand, it's essentially a contraption that takes people up to, sort of clip high branches or over wires overhead, telegraph poles, things like that, or really high trees, and it's a metal platform surrounded by a barrier, and then you're taking up really, really high. And he went on that as if you might as well, taking him into your living room. He was totally bomb-proof. And Tess was definitely more environmentally sensitive. Actually really good on that sort of stuff, but definitely more sensitive to different triggers. And again, if we look at the two breeds, a Labrador cross German Shepherd, and I'd say he had definitely had that happy-go-lucky, really sound Labrador disposition. But enough, he was robust and he was really solid in his physical being, and had definitely a lot of the German Shepherd traits. But Tess, very much being a Malinois, slightly more on edge, slightly more sensitive, her reaction to their scenario was one which would be deemed as reactive. And it really showed how, down to the individual character, how the dogs would have reacted if, for example, I owned them both and I, was emotional in one moment or anxious or concerned in a scenario, and how Reggie would have more than likely reacted and how Tess would have more than likely reacted. And bearing in mind they had that reaction with a total stranger, imagine if they were owned by me, how that response would have been amplified. And it really was a brilliant way to show how dogs pick up on our emotions, even with people that they're not connected to. When we think about the relationship that humans have with dogs, they are around us, or the domestic animals. They're around us a lot of the time. Those are dogs that live in our home. They're going to be picking up on any emotions that are in the environment, whether it be uplifting, whether it's going to be combative, whether it's aggressive, whether it's joyful. All of those emotions our dogs are going to pick up on. And certainly from my own experience, I know there's been points in my dog ownership journey when I've definitely felt not 100%, and my dogs have reflected that in me. If I look back at a period in my life when, looking back, being really transparent, I think looking back now, it was never diagnosed, but I think I had a form of depression, and where I was emotionally, where I was in terms of my mental health, was not a good place, and that definitely reflected in my dogs, not necessarily their domestic behaviour, but certainly in their ability to perform in the competitive sense. And for that period, my dogs were really inconsistent. They couldn't they couldn't complete tests that I was asking them to, simple cues in that environment they couldn't respond to. And if I look back now with hindsight, I know that it was very much because I wasn't in an emotionally balanced state to be able to focus at the time and the task at hand, and what was going on away from the dog shows or the competing was ultimately affecting what I was able, my mental game, my composure, and that definitely affected my dog's ability to perform at their best. If we look at this away from competitive sports and just look at behaviour, and we look at dogs that display reactive behaviour, often reactivity can be started or exhibited in two distinct developmental periods. The first one, when you commonly see reactive behaviour, is in that initial fear period that puppies have, roughly about 12 to 16 weeks, when they are starting to teeth. As a result of their teething, they become sensitive to environments, to sounds, to touch. If you imagine when you have toothache, how that makes you feel, and then think of how that's going to make your puppy feel. So you take your puppy, and often that also falls in line with the timeline when most people will start to take their puppies out because they've had their injections. The puppy is now able to see the more of the world, I should say. So you have a puppy that is going to be exposed to scenarios that it hasn't seen before, and it's going to be in a level of discomfort or possibly pain because of its teething. That's going to make sight, sounds, and touch more sensitive, or their dog is going to be more sensitive to those things, which then they can often display fearful, apprehensive, possibly aggressive responses to deal with those things that they're concerned about. So that can be the initial period of when dogs show the beginnings of reactive behaviour. That that period, and further along is adolescence, when your dog enters adolescence, and naturally there's going to be a hormone shift, and your dog is going to display an array of behaviours, from thrill-seeking behaviour, boundary-testing behaviour, aggression, apprehension, fear, concern, and so forth and so forth. What can happen at those 2 periods of time is your dog will display behaviour that's socially unacceptable. Lunging, barking, trying to chase, snarling, woofing, etc. The plethora of behaviours that dogs can display when they're apprehensive and concerned. And what that can do to your confidence is start to create a little crack in it. So the cycle that normally ensues is the dog behaves in a way that is deemed socially unacceptable or socially inappropriate. That then affects your confidence. So you see your dog behaving inappropriately, you then go, oh my gosh, I'm not sure where this has come from, and possibly tighten up your lead or pull the dog back, and obviously to try and deter the situation escalating. What then subsequently happens is the dog that was apprehensive will feel your tension, opposition reflex. We know that causes dogs to drive forward. So the dog feels the tension, it then pulls forward, which then compounds your anxiety because you think, oh, the dog's lunging and wants to get to the thing, I don't know what they're going to do, which then the dog that was mildly apprehensive is now, that apprehensive is now amplified because or as a result of your reaction. And before you know it, you get what I call an anxiety loop. The dog was mildly anxious, which made you mildly anxious. Because of your mild anxiety, the dog is now more anxious, which makes you more anxious, and before you know it, there's a downward spiral that ensues. Now that pattern can be carried forward in that we start to anticipate that happening in situations where we see the familiar dog, or we see the person approaching. Or the other scenario that can happen is where your dog has behaved in a way that's socially unacceptable. The person on the receiving end, or the owner of the dog on the receiving end, retaliates towards you. That then compounds or creates anxiety within you, and so forth, and the same cycle ensues. And that's something that so many people experience as dog owners with dogs that have behavioural challenges or dogs that have reactivity issues. And it isn't to say that they have set out to cause that cycle to happen, but it's definitely a consistent pattern that I see when working with people that have reactive dogs. And the first thing is owning the fact that if I can cause this, I can certainly undo it. And that isn't about blaming people, and this is what I want to shift our mindset away from. Somebody that has a reactive dog, or if you have a reactive dog, I would confidently say you did not intend for that to happen. It's probably been, a series of things that have contributed to ultimately end in that problem. But the power lies within you to turn that thing around. Whether it be the dog doesn't have sufficient impulse control, therefore it acts or it lunges when it sees fast-moving things, which is deemed as reactive. The dog is apprehensive and lacks confidence. So we can build that confidence up. The power, again, lies with you. Maybe it's down to your skill set or your knowledge about how to deal with the situation to avoid it happening or escalating. Again, the power lies with you. What we're taught as children, and what I teach my daughter, is take responsibility and accountability for our actions. And it is the most empowering thing that you can do to find a resolution and to learn and grow. And rather than blaming people for causing their dog's reactive behaviour or problematic behaviour, let's take responsibility for it. I have contributed to this because of my anxiety, so now that ultimately means I can change it. So the next question is, how do you go about doing so? The first thing is taking ownership and going, I feel or I'm aware that my anxiety levels is probably causing the dog to feel anxious. So first recognizing it and accepting that it isn't intentional, but it has happened and that pattern has been probably reinforced. So the first thing is to accept that responsibility. Second thing is to find or create tools that you can use to undo that thinking. The first thing is identify what is the narrative that you tell yourself that ultimately creates the anxiety or tension that you're feeling. What is it that you're repeatedly telling yourself? Oh, my dog's going to get off, he's going to attack the other dog, and if he attacks the other dog, there's going to be the police involved, and he's going to get seized, and that's spiraling downwards. So first, let's use logic, okay? If your dog is on a lead, and can we implement anything that's going to make you feel safer? Could we have the dog on a harness? Could we muzzle train the dog? Could we create distance away from the distraction or the thing? That's one thing. So we're putting the earnest of power and responsibility back in your shoulders and your lap. Second thing is, can we educate this dog in this environment? How can we teach our dogs to behave alternatively or to ultimately deal with the question that they are asking? I'm concerned, please move me away. I don't know how to act in that particular scenario, please give me information, and so forth. What is the question that my dog is asking that their answer currently is to react to them? What can I teach them? How can I educate them? So we've accepted responsibility. We've now found power in that acceptance of that responsibility. So now we know that we can change it. Now we've identified the core issue. How are we going to focus and train this? So we need to be thinking, this is where dog training is really going to help you. We need to think systematically about the intensity of the distraction, seeing if we can play around with that, or the distance away, which will obviously affect the intensity of the distraction. If the dog is, 3 foot away from me as opposed to 100 foot away from me, it's going to have a very different effect on my dog's behavior. Then we need to ask ourselves, well, what is it that I want my dog to do? What is it that I want my dog to do in this scenario? Do I want it to sit? Do I want it to ignore the other dog? Do I want it to look at the other dog and look back at me? Whatever it is that you want, train the dog or educate the dog to do that behavior in the presence of the distraction. Now, that's the dog training bit. So we need to now look at and how are we going to phrase that to ourselves. The thing to say is to own the fact that you are taking positive steps to remedy your dog's behavior. Live in that truth. Own that statement, okay? Really, really understand that you are doing your absolute best. Secondly is not dwell on the minor setbacks that you are more than likely going to have. Irrespective of what you're training or dog behavior resolution is not one linear state of progression from A to Z. There is often bumps in the road, setbacks, hills to overclimb and so forth until you ultimately get to that destination. The big thing is not to remain in that headspace of I've had a setback, I'm going to give up, I'm going to go back to management, I'm going to avoid. It's to get back on that horse and try again. Secondly, what else you can do to help yourself is to be aware of the physical changes that you are displaying or exhibiting. Tense body language, bracing the lead for impact, or as it were, connecting with yourself and going, oh, there's those physical things that I'm doing. You can also train your dog to see that picture differently. Take your dog to an environment where there's no distractions, your living room, your bathroom, your kitchen. Present that picture as if you're really apprehensive. Click the dog and pair that with reinforcement. So you're undoing the association or the learnt response the dog has that when you exhibit signs of apprehension and anxiety, the dog then sees that as a trigger to behave in a way that you don't want them to. So you can again take ownership and power and responsibility of changing the picture the dog now sees. Secondly, further to that, is to get yourself villagers. People that are going to support you, people that understand, people that you can vent to, people that are going to be compassionate, people that are going to be kind to you, that are going to be able to, you can vent to them, get it off your chest, and have a safe space where you can offload how you're feeling so that then you can be in a better frame of mind for taking your dog out and working through your challenges that you're having. Another thing that you can do when you're feeling anxious and you're out and about is start to connect with what actually is happening in the environment. And that might mean what I call talking yourself off the ledge. So talk about what you have in your hand. I have a dog lead. My dog is on a black lead. The lead is attached to a collar which has a silver ring on it. And what you're doing is you're bringing yourself back into a present state of being, as opposed to allowing your mind to go to a place where you are vulnerable and you're less likely to behave in a cognitive fashion. And also you're not going into that, we're talking about fight or flight. You're not going into that flight response where you're just panicking and running for the hills. You're starting to connect with what's going on in the environment, and you're using your own self-talk to bring yourself back down from feeling anxious. Anxiety is absolutely something that people can experience when they have dogs with behavioural challenges, and the dog can ultimately feel that anxiety from you. Now, if you're fortunate enough to have a dog that has a really gregarious, outgoing disposition, like a Reggie, the dog might not display an adverse or problematic response when you are feeling anxious or concerned or worried. The dog might do what Reggie did and might actually show some appeasement, or it might, when you're a bit anxious, he might come to you and nuzzle your hand and want to soothe or endear himself to you. Those behaviours are far more obviously appropriate and socially acceptable. The dog that does what Tess does, where they start to go, oh, I'm a bit panicky, I'm a bit edgy because you're feeling edgy, those are the ones that we need to be thinking about. And often, the dogs that, the Reggie types, they're generally able to go through life and rebuff a lot of our stuff because of their temperaments and their natural God-given gifts that they have. Those dogs, unfortunately, are few and far between. We get a lot of normal dogs that it's more likely, and I'd say Reggie was an exception to the rule. He was an exceptional dog. Tess is the more standard dog. They're going to have that connection with you. They're going to respond based on your emotions. So it's really important that we're aware of our mindset. Further to that, we also need to be thinking about what is the language that we use to talk about ourselves. What is the language that we use to talk about our dog? Do we say that the dog is reactive? Do we say that our dog is problematic? Do we say that our dog is stupid or lazy, etc.? Because what we're putting out in the universe is ultimately what we will attract. If we put out that energy, that's what we're going to attract, and that will be continually what we focus on. It's a case of, if I said I'm going to go and buy a red car, all of a sudden I'll see red cars everywhere. We're going to start to see the thing that we're focused on. So try and think about your language, because although dogs might not be able to pick up on specific words, my feeling is that they definitely pick up on the energy that puts out on them. I know in the past when I've labelled dogs, thick or lazy, that's how I've always seen them. So anything that they do, it's because, and I've attached it to that label. So a massive, massive thing is ditch your labels. Additionally, think about what is the belief system that you have. Do you believe that you can overcome this problem? I talked about this recently on some online conversations about reactivity, where I talked about what is your belief loop? What is the thing that you tell yourself? Do you solemnly believe that you are able to deal with the situation, that you are able to overcome, that you're able to deal with whatever is thrown at you? And that's a really, really critical part of building up your confidence. But this massive thing to acknowledge is that dogs absolutely will connect with our emotions, and that's why we have them, and that's why we have this close relationship with them. If we want to often change the dog's behaviour, and often when people implement behaviour modification processes or advice, they focus entirely on the dog's behaviour without really looking at the critical element, and that is the handler or the owner or the caregiver's needs. Are we able to have a dialogue and unpack some of the stuff? Whilst as dog trainers we're not trained professionals or psychologists or therapists or counsellors, we can offer them tools and techniques that they can implement. Think about their language, about how they talk about their dog. Work on building their confidence. Think about the environments that we take them in and showing them, create a pattern of success. Often what can help is if you go out with them and support them on those walks or those challenging situations. Offer to find somebody they can buddy up with that can help them through that process. Advise them to go to a certain a group or make some suggestions which can help them find villagers to support them, or create a community which is a safe space for them to offload, to share their successes, to share their concerns, and to vent when need be. All those things can help not only the dog but our community and people within it that are having struggles with dogs. But it's really, really critical that we're aware that the reason that we love dogs so much and we have this amazing relationship and dogs are considered man's best friend is because they connect with who and what we are. You can see consistently people who own dogs, they almost create a distinct pattern of behaviours. I certainly in the sports world, I know certain trainers that will consistently produce certain types of dogs, whether they're consistent or they're successful or a particular training entity. It will always be the case irrespective of the dog that they have. That can't be the dog, it has to be something within the trainer. So we need to, again, take responsibility for our role and use that as a source of power to be able to overcome and move forward in our training and relationship with our dogs. Dogs absolutely connect with our emotions. That's what makes them what they are and why we love having them in our lives. For me, that's what this podcast is all about, sharing information and lifting people up and acknowledging how amazing dogs are to us. Thanks thanks for joining me on this podcast. Hopefully it's been interesting. If you want to find out more information about reactivity, just check out my website, Relabeling Reactivity, or kamalfernandez.co.uk for more information and knowledge about reactivity.